Hey everybody, hope all is well. Welcome back to the ShabinLife. Dayna and I are up here at our land for a couple days. We are going to install a small solar setup so that we don't have to cart the batteries back and forth and charge them at home. But before we get started, we're going to jack the shed up a little bit to level out the front end. So I will insert us jacking the shed up here. Alright, so the shed's up a little bit, maybe an inch or so. The tough part is I can't really go inside to find out if I'm level because of the door being so shifted now that only one side's getting pushed up. Which, just so you know, if you ever buy a shed and your door won't close, you know, typically that's what you would do is jack, essentially jack that side up or jack the opposing side up. And you can do it from the front or the back most of the time. But right now, because I have the right side jacked up so high, the shed door is offset, almost pushing until I actually level out the other side. Really what I wanted to do was go in, grab the level and put it across one of the top framed pieces so I can see if we're close to being where I want to be. Not exactly going to get it, but I've got to lower this side down in order to do the other side, so maybe I'll jump in the shed once I do that. All right, so here we are the next day. The battery ran out on the phone when we were videoing us jacking up the shed. So I just wanted to quick show you that everything worked out really nice. All right, now that we got the shed lifted and it seemed like it worked out okay, we were off by like almost a full bubble when we leveled out the front to back, and now we're only off by maybe a quarter bubble, and that's fine. It was enough to get the front lifted, and the floor seemed like it dipped a little bit, so everything seems a little bit better. I feel more comfortable installing all the rest of the solar stuff. But with that being said, we're going to do our best to try and show you the solar install. I think one of the most interesting parts about having the land and still, not living here, and this probably could be a whole different video, at least I find it a little unique. I watch all these YouTube videos and I love all this crazy awesome stuff that everybody's doing, but a lot of times the channels that we watch, those people are homesteading or living off grid on their land. Some people that we watch are sort of in the process of making that transition, and that's sort of where we are. But what makes it a little bit unique for us is you have these grand ideas, but you're 4 hours away from your property, and you decide you want to do something up there, and you try and get as much of a accomplished at home, and then bring with you all the way up to the land all the stuff that you've either pre-assembled or pre-cut, and if you didn't get a chance to measure when you were up here or you changed something, you're sort of trying to do a whole bunch at your regular house and then be as prepared as you can when you get up, to your property. So for me, that's a really interesting part of all of this, and the solar was is a good example. Amongst a lot of the other things like the kitchen, and we kind of do some measuring, and then you go home and you change a bunch of stuff, but it's not like you can re-measure again. So you're sort of looking back at old YouTube videos that you shot months before to try and say, is there a stud in that wall? Am I going to hit that stud? Did I put this here? Where does the electric run? Did I go 16 inches off the ground? You have all these questions, but you're at home and you can't really have answers to them until you get up here, and then it might be a little bit, it's not too late, but you want to try and get up here and accomplish something, so you want to do all your stuff back at home. So with the solar, and maybe I'll insert some videos or do a second video, because what we tried to do was build sort of as much of the solar stuff as we could, which was really just the charge controller panel and the battery box, as well as like terminate some of the wires and do all that stuff. It's not like we couldn't do that here, but we had to do some heat shrink at home, and it's not like I'm plugging a heat gun or a blow hair dryer or torch up here. And I have tools in the truck, and we have tools that we bring up here, but of course you bring every tool and you forget the one you need, or you get stuck in a bind where you have to make a certain hole or whatever, and you just don't have that drill bit. So we try to plot and scheme at home a lot, build whatever we possibly can, then bring up here as much as we possibly can. So to all you people out there that are in transition, God bless you. And to be making the YouTube video on top of it, I always say to my wife, I'm one of those guys that goes to a concert, enjoys the concert, comes home from the concert, lives it over in my head. I'm not taking pictures, I'm not videoing at the concert, which is tough because it means I don't get to play it back, but it means that I was in the moment and I enjoyed it while I was there. And sometimes when we're doing stuff here at the Shabin or in the land, I really want to document it, for my family, for our friends, for us, and for YouTube. But it's tough sometimes because, those who do these videos know you sort of have to plan ahead of time in order to have some idea as to what you're going to video and then how you're going to go back and edit it. But anyway, getting back to solar, we tried to do as much as we could at home and then come up here. So what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to show you the battery box install, the panel install, then we're going to install the panels, then we're basically going to wire everything up, fire it all up, plug everything back in, and pray that we don't blow up the Shabin. But we're going to start with the battery box. So I'll just have Dayna kind of grab the camera and follow me around, and we'll do the best we can to sort of show you each little step as we go along. And I'll try and explain as much as I can. So hang in there, here we go. All right, so this is the battery box that we built. It looks like our composting toilet, so we'll have to make sure that I don't get up in the middle of the night, open the lid, and take a crap in here. But this is the battery box we built. Like I was saying before, we tried to do as much pre-assembly as we could so that I could come up here and just kind of mount the box and move on. So this is the box. I already fed the temperature sensor that's going to go up to the charge controller through the back of the box. These are the feeds that are coming up from the battery to the charge controller. Here's the box. Again, I'll probably throw in some video of me building the box, so maybe it gives a little more explanation, but if I repeat myself, I apologize. This is the inverter mounted to the bottom, and then the plug basically comes out and is going to, jump over and plug in, which we'll show you later, plugs into the Shabin. That's what fires up the electric. But what I need to do first is I want to drill the vent for the battery box. Not to get too detailed, but ultimately we're just using, regular deep cell flooded batteries, and as they're charging, they can off gas, and it's really supposed to be vented. So we're not using any type of active venting system, no fan. I don't want anything running. So ultimately what I did was just use 1.5 inch or 1.25 inch PVC. I already pre-drilled a hole saw for where the pipe's going to go through. So basically I'm just going to mark it up, make my hole, pull the battery box away, drill through the rest of the Shabin so that I can insert the pipe through and put the fittings on both sides. But again, this is one of those examples of, you know, when I drilled this hole, I'm about 4 inches away from a stud and about 3 inches off a stud. But I had to look back at old YouTube videos before I sheathed this wall to see, like, did I put a stud here? Where does the wire run? So if you hear something pop, it's just because I hit something that I didn't see in the video. But ultimately, I'm just going to make my pilot here so that I can know exactly where I'm going to be going through on the wall. All right, so now that I got this hole through, I have some insulation back here. I'm going to clear out the insulation. I'm going to see if I can put the hole saw through and make a mark through the other side because I really want the pipe to be perfectly straight. Basically, I'm going to use the pipe as like a way to lock the box in place real nice. So ultimately, I don't want the pipe to be sitting offset on the outside because basically there's just a fitting on the inside of the box that's going to hold it. And then I think I put like a 45 or a 90 with a screen in it on the outside. So it's probably more than you need to know. Basically, there's going to be a pipe going through the wall. But we're going to see if we can clear out the insulation a little bit so I don't get hung up on the hole saw. And then make my little pilot. And if I have to drill it from the outside, that's fine. But if I can get the pilot bit through to give me an exact mark as to where I am, that'll make sure that the pipe stays nice and straight. So I'm just trying to give myself a little pocket in here so that I don't get hung up. For those of you who have drilled through a wall and hit insulation, normally with a paddle bit or a drill bit, it gets all wrapped up around the bit. And I don't want to tear the insulation too bad. Oh, let's see if I can. So I'm going to finish the hole from the outside. All right, good?
Yep.
All right, so we got the hole drilled. We're going to put the box back in place. And if I did everything right, it should match up nice. If it doesn't, we'll be editing this out of the video. Okay, so it looks good. Before I pop it in, I'll give you an idea of what I did here. So it's just a piece of, I think it's 1.25 inches. I cut off the size, maybe 1.5 inches. But all I did was, so I didn't want to get too crazy, I took a coupling and I cut a piece of the pipe off and I put a screen over top the coupling, and then my little piece of pipe that I cut off, I pushed in here, put it on a table, and I just pushed down. And what I got was, can you see that all right? So what I got was a little screen, and I actually doubled the screen up so it was nice and thick in there and that bugs couldn't crawl through and all that good stuff. So basically this is going to slide on the inside of the box like you'll see. And then what I did for the outside is I did the same thing on a 45. I just basically cut myself a little piece of pipe that would act as like a, you know, a wedge to hold the screen in there. So it was just basically building, you know, something that I could use as a passive venting system. I didn't want to buy anything, and this was really inexpensive to do. Plus I had it laying around the house. So the idea is this should go through nice and easy. Perfect. So it goes through to the outside. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to attach this on the outside. Let me know when you're good. All right, hold nice and tight, okay? Twist yours. Okay. Push and twist. Push. Okay, you're good. All right, so I probably look corny with my headgear on, right? So the passive vent's on, glued from both sides. Again, it's just a little extra to help vent the batteries while they're charging. But now I'm going to start assembling the box. Basically, that is just dropping the two deep cell batteries in there, wiring them in parallel, which you can obviously Google all this stuff, but parallel wiring is you're doubling the amp hours but staying with the same voltage. So it's two 12-volt batteries. We're going to do a 12-volt system. They're around like 96 to 100 amp hours each battery. So ultimately, it'll be a 12-volt, 200 amp battery setup. So basically, that's just positive, positive, negative to negative. And then while I'm down here, I'm going to wire the inverter to the battery, and I'm going to get ready to wire the charge controller wires to the battery as well. So we'll just do a little bit at a time, and I'll try and get it all in so that you can see down in the box. But I'm going to start with the batteries. I pulled the battery back out, the one I had in there. Before I put them in there, not that I'm not going to be able to do it while it's in the box, but it's a little easier before I wire them up. I'm just going to check the water levels in the cells to make sure they're sort of topped off. You know, you just fill them with distilled water to the top of the cell. All right, so batteries are in. I'm going to start wiring them up so that they're in parallel, like I said, which is just positive to positive, negative to negative. We'll start there, and then we'll move on to the next part. But as a matter of fact, when I'm down here, I might as well go ahead and pop on the inverter. So I'm going to wire the positive to the positive first. And I know, you know, I think everybody has their own way, but, you know, most of the inverter companies will tell you to mount the positive on the positive terminal, then the negative on the negative terminal. So a good way to think of that is be positive that you mount the positive first. But I'm going to try and do the positive and negative inverter on this battery, and I'm going to try and tie as long as I have the length, I'm going to tie the charge controller into the other battery. Some people will say, like, you know, positive on one, negative on the other. You know, I only have two in parallel, so I'm not super duper concerned about, you know, how spreading out the discharge, or, you know, spreading out the way that they're charging and discharging. So I'm just screwing down not only the battery cable that's wiring the two batteries in parallel, but I'm also mounting the inverter cable on there as well. So I have the positive cable on there, and now I'm going to do the negative. This is the negative battery terminal cable, and then I'm going to throw the negative wire from the inverter on as well. And if you can't see in the back, I don't know if Dayna has a shot in the back, there is a 250, I think, amp A&L fuse back there that's made for the inverter.
Shine your light.
It's mounted to the back of the box back there. Basically, you can just take the cover off and change out the battery if you need to. But that's basically down there to protect the inverter. So we've got just want to make sure I don't. Might be a spark, I don't know, but we'll see. That's okay. I'm going to have to take off these two terminals again anyway to put the charge controller, but I don't want to do that yet. But essentially, because the batteries are all wired up and the inverter's wired up, the inverter should power up. So there's the inverter powered up. And right now I'm showing 12.5 volts. And that's probably because we used the battery in the past, one of the batteries yesterday to run the TV and some lights and all that good stuff. But I'm going to shut this off for now, and then we can continue mounting the rest of the stuff. So like I said, the charge controller wires are down here ready to get hooked up, but we're going to mount the charge controller panel first and then finish off and then continue with the wiring. All right, so I got the panel. I'm going to throw the panel up there, and then I'll sort of tell you what it is. Perfect. Okay, so this is the charge controller, and these are the disconnects or breakers, you know, for the system. Basically what will happen is the solar panels will come down, the positive will tie into here, the negative will just continue through up to the charge controller, and then I pre-wired the positive from the breaker all the way down to the charge controller, and then from the charge controller out to charge the batteries, they'll come out. The positive's already been wired up here, and then we'll continue down to the battery, and then the negative will come through and go down to the battery as well. But I'm gonna finish mounting this up, and realistically, I probably will tie in the batteries. You should tie the batteries in first always. You should never connect the solar panels before the batteries are tied to the charge controller. As a matter of fact, once we mount the panels, run the wires, tie everything in, I won't actually connect the connections at the panel until the very end, and then that'll be fun for us to see everything light up and show that the panels are charging the batteries. But right now I'm going to finish mounting this up, and then we'll start tying everything together. Alright, so we're going to wire up the batteries to the charge controller. I might not have mentioned it before, I don't even know if you can see it, but it's the Renogy Rover 40 amp controller. The MPPT is maximum point power tracking. You can read all about charge controllers online. This was just easy. I got it on sale. Renogy's easy to get from Amazon, which makes it easy for pretty much everybody, but it gets a lot of good reviews. Just like everything else, there are some people that didn't like it. Whatever. Anyway, this is a 40 amp, even though we're only hooking up 2 panels, 200 amp or 100 watt panels. Essentially, if you take the 100 watt divided by 12, you get around like 8 point something amps. Let's just say 9 amps. So the 2 panels should essentially be around 18 amps. The Renogy Rover 40 amp is obviously capable of 40 amps, so I could hook another 200 amp, 200 watts worth of panels. If I changed it over to a 24 volt system, which it is capable of, we could do 800 watts of solar, which we probably won't do just because the inverter's 12 volt. But the Bussmann breakers, I don't want to say this was overkill. I'm a huge fan of Bussmann from working in the electrical industry for years, but and by working in electrical, I mean selling a lot of electrical and distribution and doing a bit of electrical, not an electrician. So this is not electrician 101 class by any stretch. But the Bussmann breakers are 50 amp breakers, which is definitely overkill. But it leaves me room that if we added on to the system and did the 400 watts, we'd end up somewhere around 36 amps. And typically, I think that a lot of times when you're sizing the fuses and the breakers, they say to use a 25% rule, so you essentially would take the 36 amps times 25%, which adds on, another, another 6 amps or so, which puts you just over 40. So essentially they would say size it at a 50 amp fuse, or a 50 amp breaker. So that's why I did the 50 amp Bussmann breaker. Plus I really like these because ultimately, who wants to have to continue to replace a fuse? One, obviously your system has a problem, so that's why you keep blowing a fuse, which is what it's there for. But I would hate to have to keep paying for a fuse essentially that could cost $10 or $15 each time it blows, whereas at least the breaker is just going to trip, so I can fix whatever the problem is and then reset it. In addition, I can essentially use these as a disconnect switch. So if I have to shut power from the inverter to the charge controller off, or from the panels to the charge controller, I can kind of use them as an on-off switch. All right, so I'm going to wire right now the positive and negative for the charge controller to the batteries. And while I'm doing that, I'll drop in a video here or a little clip here of me doing the panel, so you can kind of see, like I was saying earlier about having to build some things at home, to get it ready. I think I've got a little footage of me building the panel at home, so I'll drop it in right here.
Mic check 1 2. Turn me up in the headphones. Turn the music down. Yeah, there we go. 1 2. What you gonna do when you find you're at the end of your rope? Can't cope, State of the Union's hands on a slippery slope. Well, GF and I decided our feelings coincided with a trip that silly W was making up to Philly. You need to understand we hate the man, everything for which he stands, all the secret plans and dirty hands. So when a certain document was taken a drive up 95, relocating from the National Archive, four of us devised a scheme like the A-Team. No guns, no killing, was stealth in and out the building. The president was speaking on a new containment. All got matrix, titanium, and glass encasement. They will move it from the basement to the Constitution Center for 24 hours. No one was the lever and GF's my man with surveillance and security tapes. Flavor said it, I'ma steal it. They don't plan the escape. Debate the years, shed tears, ask God to persevere. It's hard living in this place this year, so it's time to give the people's taste of retribution. Hold your breath, cause our crew's about to steal the Constitution for real. Well, they've been lying to you, baby. Well, they've been lying to you, baby. Oh, well, they've been lying to you, baby. Now you know. Across the street from the Target, here I mark it on the map. There's a cemetery, Ben Franklin's buried at. Next to the tomb, there's a sewer drain leading to a water main, crossing over arch above the train. Now that tunnel leads to a corridor, bringing me below the floor, right around 11:04. At 11:08, GF will loop the tape, locking the temperature gauge so I can cop a well and flip the crate. Shoot the grapple launcher, hook the belt connector, wrap around the duct. Thank the Lord for modern architecture. Activate the hoist mechanism, angle off the joist, spin over toward the prize. Flavor got me in. She said it took months to get the job as art director. When we conceived, I decided art can be deceiving. Every piece below the surface has a purpose, aesthetically tuned to help you navigate around the room. There's motion sensors on the floors and doors, to the shelves, to the displays, especially calibrated to your weight. Shock absorption in the shape of quill pens and bifocal lenses, size 10s. You're in, now get me out, Dane. No sweat, she beams with confidence at the prospect of taking this document hostage. Go back the way you came in.
All right, so now we've got the battery, the positive tied in over here that goes to the battery. Now I'm going to attach the positive side from the battery up to the other side of the breaker. So I basically pulled it out of the battery box down here and do my best to just feed everything through like I had originally planned. Basically what I'll do is after I get everything tied in real nice, then I'll go back and pull wires and make sure everything's zip tied and sort of make it look nice and neat. The idea of using all these PVC clamps was, you know, generally to keep all the wires somewhat together. So the one thing I did want to add to is a lot of the reviews and a lot of the stuff from Renogy does say not to over tighten the terminals once you get the wires in there. Some reviews I've read talk about like the actual you know, the wire inserts, like not having enough room for the wires in there. And to be honest, I think there's plenty of room, and I actually like the way that you have to back the screw out in order to put the wire into the lug. It actually is pretty nice. But one of the things that they do say is not to over tighten them, so I'm trying to be cautious when I'm putting these in right now. Make sure everything's nice and snug, but not, you know, crank it down too much like I would normally want to. But so I've got the positive that's going to charge the batteries coming out, going into the breaker, and then this is going down into the battery box. And like I said, I'll sort of come back and clean these up a little bit, make sure all the wires are sitting really pretty, mount them to the wall real nice so that they're out of the way. This is just the cable line for the television or the antenna, like I have cable at the Shabin. But now I'm going to pull up the negative terminal from the battery and wire that in as well. Again, just trying to be gentle about tightening those lugs after all the reviews. But so far so good. So that's the positive and the negative going down to the batteries. And now essentially we can tie them in to the, we can tie them into the batteries now. And essentially that should fire up the charge controller. Not like I've ever done this before. Let's see. All right. So that is the charge controller wires down. Now, essentially the breaker is tripped. So I guess we'll find out once I fire this up. Never done this live on camera before. All right. So it looks like essentially everything's working on the charge controller. I'll be interested to see the comparison between the charge controller readings and the inverter readings. But there's no solar hooked up yet. It's sitting at 12.3. I don't know much about the charge controller, obviously, because it hasn't been fired up yet, so I'm excited to kind of read through the manual, and I'm sure it's pretty much set it and forget it, especially for such a simple system like that. But so far, so good. Charge controller's all set up. And now really the next step is going to be to wire up the solar panels and get the wires down in here and tie them into the charge controller. But as far as the battery and the battery box and the inverter, everything's pretty much good to go right now. The only thing left I have to do is run the temperature probe wire up and tie it into the charge controller. But I'll probably just do that at the end. All right, so we're on the roof, way up here on the Shabin, and we're just getting the panels mounted to the roof. Pretty straightforward. You know, it comes with self-tappers, you know, to go for the roof with rubber washers on them. Basically, I'm just mounting one on each side. That's south, east, west. I don't want them both on that side. We get a lot of sun in the east when the sun comes up in the morning, even with some of these trees. It's not a huge system, so I'm not really worried about, you know, if this one starts to fade out during the afternoon. We're only on like a 412 pitch roof, 512 pitch roof, so it's going to pick up sun no matter where it's at. But basically I just have them all measured off so that they're both even. Got the wires ready to tap into the connectors and just mounting them, like I said, with the self-tappers to the roof. Pretty straightforward, nothing too crazy. Once I get this done, I'm going to put a hole in the side of the Shabin underneath the soffit that basically I can feed the panel wires down to the charge controller. So I'll finish mounting these and then we'll drill the hole in order to put the wires down to the charge controller. Are you videoing me? Am I on camera? Alright, so I'm going to send the wires through from the panels to the charge controller. I'm basically just... What are you doing down there, fruitcake?
It's a little windy.
It doesn't matter. I'm going to send the wires through from the panel. I'm basically just going to pull the wires down, get them kind of snugged in tie them into the charge controller, and then any of the slack of the wire that I have, I'm actually going to try and tie wrap up where the panels are, because I think I'd rather have the slack up there in case I decide to add additional panels. I'll have a little bit of flexibility of moving, you know, from a split, like a two-way splitter, into a four-way splitter. So we're going to run wires in and do all that good stuff. So I'm going to go ahead and tie the positive side that's running from the breaker, that will be from the positive side of the panel. I'm going to tie that in real quick, and then I'll tie the negative in. That's nice and snug. Of course, I kind of hose myself here. All right. I even like the look of it. But that's the positive and negative from the panel. So now I'm going to bring the positive down. And the positive will be mounting on the inside of the breaker. I know Bussmann says there's no, I don't want to say, there's no wrong way to wire these. I mean, you essentially could have them backwards, but it's hard to see from pictures when you look at them online, but there is a battery side and an aux side. So I just use the battery side as the inside and the aux as the out. I've looked at a lot of posts and stuff where people wired these, and basically, you know, they've went either direction and the breaker should still do its job, but I just tried to stay true to, you know, battery being, let's call it an in, and the aux being an out. So that's on there nice and tight. And then basically what I'll do is run these up, mount them really nicely, and tie them in up along the roof line. But for the most part, everything's tied in really well down here. All that's really left to do is connect them at the panel, or at the panels, but I think I'm actually gonna wire tie and get them a little bit neat so that I know how much of a coil I'm gonna have outside. So I'm gonna do that real quick, and then we'll be back to connect everything. This is me just trying to be overly neat now. Alright, let's fire it up. Alright, so I just tied the solar panels in, just connected all the connections outside. So once I throw the breaker, I'm not quite sure, but maybe we'll see the solar panel light come on. I don't know if maybe we'll start seeing that it's producing energy, but we'll give it a shot. And if it blows up or anything happens, we'll be editing this whole part out of the video. All right, so I see the sun. It switched to sun, and boom, there goes the solar light. Not gonna lie, that was about 15 seconds worth of what did I do wrong. But it looks like the panels are now on, up and running, and the voltage for the batteries just jumped to 12.8, so we're definitely charging. So I would say, I would say that this is a win. I'm getting pointed to and suggested by my wife all kinds of craziness to, I assume, plug in. She's signing me to plug it in, plug it in. She wants me to plug in probably so I can turn the lights on and make sure everything's working. So basically, you should see my wife trying to dance around with a tripod in her hand, holding the phone, like just collapsing the tripod or doing something other than walking around like she's Mick Jagger is going to be, suffice. So all we've done in the Shabin is just wired the whole thing in a loop, which I've talked about before. Basically, every receptacle starts and then ties all the way down in one big circle, and then I jump off two of the receptacles on each side of the door to light switches. One inside light switch powers the two little LED lights, and then the other light switch powers floodlights outside so that we can see at night. But it's one big loop. So basically what happens is the inverter just has a male plug on one side that goes in the inverter, and a male plug, which you'll see on the other side, that plugs into any outlet in the Shabin and essentially sends power from the inverter to the Shabin. So we'll see. Let's see if we got some power here. So that's in. And let's fire the inverter up. So the inverter is now on. So if I did everything right, we should have lights. Damn! What you know about what you know about. So I would say all in all, the solar install was a success. Happy so far, but it's been about a minute. So we'll make sure that we give some sort of maybe update. And maybe before the end of this video, I'll try and sum everything up, walk you through each thing again real quick, just so you sort of know what's what, how things are connected, all that good stuff. But very happy, solar's working, panels are up. I think all in all, we are in good shape. So rock and roll. Thanks for hanging out.